Enjoy this Wild Soul Gathering production. I'm Dr. Sandra Marie. Pour yourself a really tall glass of spiritual curiosity and join me for the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. In the spirit of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life. Hi, Dr. Sandra Marie here. I'd like to welcome all our listeners. Thank you for joining us today. My question today is, what if the most difficult seasons of your life weren't the end of the story, but the beginning of your transformation? Today's guest has spent more than 2 decades exploring that question through art, writing, meditation, personal experience. In her new book, Caterpillar Soup, Memoirs of a Butterfly from the Caterpillar's Perspective, chronicles a 20-year journey through grief, awakening, creativity, and healing, inviting readers to discover how life's greatest challenges can become catalysts for profound change. Please join me in welcoming artist, author, and transformational guide, Ellen Benfatti, to Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. Welcome, Ellen.
Hi, Sandra. It's so nice to be here. I'm so excited to be with you today.
Well, this is going to be a great conversation. First of all, Ellen, the title of your book immediately caught my attention. What exactly is Caterpillar Soup?
Well, it was a way to hopefully grab a potential reader's attention. Number one, what is Caterpillar Soup? And I started to recognize as I was going through my transformation that everything was a big soupy mess. Like everything in my life became very messy. Old structures were falling apart. New structures that wanted to emerge were difficult to integrate. And at times I felt like, am I like losing my mind? And I just came up with the idea of Caterpillar Soup during a meditation. I follow a teacher and he used the word Caterpillar Soup when he was talking about going within and coming into your self-realization or your embodiment. He actually said something and he said, we're all just worms and sometimes it feels like we're caterpillar soup. And I went, that's it. That's the name of my book. And I had always said that to Source. I was like, I'll know it's time when you give me the name, because I had been recording and writing for decades. And I was like, but I didn't know it. And it seemed like it was just a lot of moving parts. And I had gone to, when I first came into Sedona, I had gone to a metaphysical shop and was talking to a reader there, a psychic reader. And I never really do that kind of thing for myself. But I thought, you know what? I like this person. I'm going to see what they have to say about me. And he actually told me about my book. And he says, you're going to write a book. And he says, and you're going to feel like it's disjointed. You're going to feel like it just rambles on to different things. And he goes, but keep it that way. It's meant to be that way. And so in the back of my mind, I always had that lingering, that thought that, let it ramble, let it go in and out of different seasons of my life and not necessarily chronologically.
Well, that's really sort of a fascinating background. So your book isn't written from the butterfly's perspective. It's written from the caterpillar's perspective. Why the caterpillar's perspective?
Well, I think the caterpillar does all the work. So, the caterpillar has to, first of all, I did a little research on the butterfly before, I published. And
fascinating creature.
Very. And there's male and female butterflies. I always thought of a butterfly as female. They actually are male and female. So you can have male butterflies and female butterflies.
I did not know that.
I know.
I guess I never thought about it.
Me either. And so that was fascinating. The next thing is that butterflies, when they lay the eggs for the caterpillars to become caterpillars, they just lay the eggs and then they go away. Like there's no mothering. There's no parenting. And so as I was doing my research, I was like, that's kind of how we feel as humans. We drop into this reality and we're just kind of like we're given parents. And some of us have good parents. Some of us might not have the best. We might have had very hands-on parents that were like very nurturing. I came from my mom was a single parent and she was working all the time and I had all the freedom in the world. Right. So there were just these nuances. And as I was doing my research, once I had decided what I would call the book, I was like, well, I know that I want it to be about transformation. What better, character than to have caterpillar to butterfly? But what I started to recognize is that the caterpillar instinctually knows when it's time to start making its cocoon. I call it creating its hammock, its sleeping bag, its caterpillar sleeping bag is what I call it, the caterpillar hammock. And then when the caterpillar goes into that cocoon, everything starts to melt, really. Everything disintegrates and is reconstructed. The DNA structure, everything is restructured. And I started to identify that as that's what it feels like when you come into awakening. I see it as 4 stages. Something happens that awakens you suddenly. Usually it's an event or a series of events. Then there comes the surrender. So the caterpillar wakes up and it's like, I need to get building my hammock, And then the caterpillar goes into the hammock, to the sleeping bag. And then it's like, it has to surrender. There's struggle in there. It's like, can you imagine? You're in this tight little space, dark, you start eating your own innards. I mean, it's crazy town. So, and then the next stage is embodiment. So then the caterpillar has to fully embody itself as a butterfly and then emerge into what you might call ascension, right? And the butterfly doesn't live very long. The stage of the caterpillar is much longer. There's a section in my book that I talk about when I was 8 years old, I moved to Hawaii. My mom had remarried and my stepfather was a Marine. So we moved to Oahu. And I had gotten a banana seat bike the Christmas before. Remember that?
Yeah, so that was like super cool present.
Like the 70s, right? So I had my banana seat bike. And so, of course, we moved, I think it was pretty much spring, summer, like moving into summer, spring, something like that. So I never really got to ride my new bike. Anyways, everything was shipped over to Hawaii and we were waiting for housing to be built. It was brand new housing being built, base housing. And when we finally moved in, it was the rainy season. So I put my bike, I couldn't ride it. I put it on the patio. And then as rainy season dried up, I went out to want to ride my bike. And there were hundreds of caterpillar cocoons, butterfly cocoons on the spokes of my wheels.
Wow.
Hundreds of them. Every single spoke had a row of them just hanging. And oh man. Well, I knew I couldn't ride my bike now because if I did, they would all die. So even at that age, I was very empathic and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to ride my bike. Well, there was this little gal next door, a couple doors down, who came over one day and she said, do you want to ride bikes? This was several weeks later. And a lot of the cocoons had emerged but there were still some on the bike. And I rode the bike. And I'll never forget that feeling, of riding the bike and knowing that some of them didn't make it because I was so impatient that I had to ride. But I was an 8-year-old little girl,
right.
So there's just, when I look at my life and I say, that to me is profound, that I would have that experience at 8 years old, and then I would be writing a book about caterpillar and butterfly. So there's so much of my soul woven into this manuscript, really.
Yeah, like you can't make this stuff up. I was just going to say that this was in your purview that young and that you had that powerful of an experience. Like you have to think this was part of the mission of this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
You describe pain as the cocoon in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, was there a moment when you realized your suffering wasn't your punishment, it was your transformation?
It was a slow drip campaign.
Okay. Fair enough.
I would say it wasn't until, halfway through this 20 years. I think for a long time, I saw it as I wasn't good enough. There were parts of me that I felt like it was punishment. It was like What did I do wrong? Why is everything in my life falling apart? Why is my friend so-and-so still happily married and thriving and I'm not? Like why me, God? Like, why is my life blowing up? Right. And now I see it as an absolute blessing. And that's what the book is about, the people that wear the different masks in our lives. They're our greatest teachers. And they take us to our highest timeline of love. They really do. And I am so grateful for each of those relationships and the experiences that I had, because it really has taken me to my highest timeline in this lifetime for sure. I didn't know I was an artist. I didn't know I was a painter. I had to find a way to express what I was experiencing through my awakening. I began to get profound downloads that were way out of my wheelhouse, and I didn't know how to verbalize it. I was a banker, I had a small little net branch for a mortgage company. I was on the computer a lot. I didn't want to write, but I was having all these profound visions, like nighttime dreams. And in meditation, these colors would come to me, and there was no ayahuasca involved. It was just like I was, opening up, and I had to somehow try to express it. I knew that it was important enough to document. I thought I was doing it for myself, right? It was something
Yeah.
I needed to process it because it was so profound, but I also knew that it was important. Like, I knew that I was documenting something important. That's the best way I could say it. So I picked up the paintbrush one day and I started painting.
Well, so I do want to get into your painting because that's a whole really cool journey in itself, but I do have a couple more questions about the book.
Okay.
So I feel like many people listening feel like right now they're in a caterpillar soup globally.
Yes.
Like there's just a lot happening right now. So to me, it's no coincidence that this book is coming out and that you're out there having a lot of discussion about it as a vehicle to help people.
Mm-hmm.
So from your perspective, for these people who feel like they're really in the caterpillar soup right now, what might that stage actually feel like for different people?
I can only speak for myself, what it felt like for me. And I recognize that collectively we're waking up. And so it may feel very similar to other people. So what it felt like for me was a tug of war. There was my ego, my personality, my mind was like, you need to get up and go to work, and you need to get more loans, and you need to this, and you need to that, and you should this, and you should that, and blah, 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 blah. And then there was this tender, soft-spoken, soulful part of me that was like, Ellie, you should just have a nice cup of tea this morning and paint. And that's what it feels like. And it may not be painting that someone, when they're feeling that pull into the awakening, it may be a different medium that they're pulled to, but it's like a left turn. It's just that left turn where you're feeling it, and it gets to the point that you can no longer deny it. Everything that is no longer in alignment for you. Literally, I call it the Tower card in tarot, starts to crumble. And the illusions are, you're no longer in the illusion. You're no longer able to, stay in that same state of consciousness. You just can't do it. And so it can feel like you're losing your mind.
Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to share why this work matters. The world doesn't need more noise these days. It needs more thoughtful conversations. That's why I created Wild Souls Gathering in this podcast, spaces where curiosity is welcome, questions are honored, and exploration matters. Each week, I have the privilege of introducing you to inspiring guests and lesser-known voices doing meaningful work in the world. Together, we're exploring what it means to live a more aware and authentic life. If these conversations bring value to you, please subscribe, share the show, and consider supporting Wild Souls Gathering. Your support helps keep this work independent, ad-free, and accessible. Thank you for being here. And now let's get back to the conversation. Well, I think it's one of the things that you're acknowledging is super important, that it will look and feel different for each individual because it's a unique journey. But the end part, as you were saying, the process of it, especially, I love the tarot card of the Tower. That's such a great example. As long as you're going to resist it, you're going to end up in that Tower card type of environment of the soup, right? And then as you move along, it'll look different from your perspective. When does the caterpillar know it's time to stop crawling and trust the cocoon?
That's at the very beginning. It's that powerful pull of letting things go that you know are no longer working and surrendering to that. It's that moment of surrender. That's when you enter the cocoon. That's when you know that you're beginning to build your silk nest so that you have a safe container to do that journey, right? You cannot become the butterfly without surrender. You just can't. So there's the awakening, which is what I would call the rupturing of your structures where you realize they're just not working anymore. That's the boom. It's like, this is not working, right? And then that pull to surrender, to do something in a different way, to take that left turn, to say, you know what? It may be as simple as speaking up for yourself in your marriage. If you're a woman or a man and you're in a marriage where your voice isn't heard, that might feel like the beginning of your awakening. It doesn't have to be like
it's the small moments that are big moments.
that are really big moments. And it's funny because I like to paint with pointillism, and I was just going over this. I have a vision of a painting that's coming to me. And every little dot, every little dot when I'm painting pointillism is a tiny moment. And I'm going to do a series called Tiny Moments now. I just came up with that actually in the last 48 hours because looking over my body of work, those tiny moments, those tiny little movements and changes that I made created the pathway and formed who I am today. I guess what I'm trying to explain is that on the inside, it feels like it's such a huge thing. But on the outside, it could be as simple as stopping your partner and saying, you know what? I really need to be heard in this relationship or at your job or something like that. It's really about, this whole book's about the individuation process and coming into and going into your own autonomy, right? And those little things that we have to do. I had never individuated. I got married young, so I just went right into marriage. So I had to, at 37, 38 years old, figure out who I was because all those structures had broke down. I was no longer, wasn't identified in my career as a wife, as a mother, as, all those things, all those structures began to crumble.
Right. People underestimate the ordinary moments in life and in the small interactions that could have such positive impact for sure. As we were talking before we started recording, you had mentioned a very brief conversation that you had with some, I'm using air quotes, random man.
Yes.
About your life or what ended up being the book. And basically, this stranger who passed through your life, who probably had a 5-minute conversation with you, changed your whole life.
Yes.
And he probably doesn't even recognize it. And I think that it's really important to remember and for people to recognize that we do make such differences in ways that we don't know many times, and that you just have to trust with that.
Yeah. And that's kind of how in this process, because it is very much connected to my creative process. When I got like my first vision, it was an angel that came, and I was at a Reiki ceremony. I was getting certified as Reiki level 1. I had this vision of this angel that came and stood in front of me, and this angel blew on my feet. It was neither male nor female. And as the pink pixie dust went up through my body, it erupted into red, blue, and then purple, spiraling above me. I was very moved by it. I've never felt so much love in my entire life. And after that, it was so profound. Everyone in the circle, our eyes were closed, but afterwards they were like, whatever happened for Ellie was pretty big. We all felt the energy of it. And my Reiki master teacher said, I really think that you should write that down, or you should draw it. You should do something with that, Ellie, because you don't want to forget that moment. And I remember looking at her going, Wendy, I don't think I could ever forget that. That is transformative. That is like the biggest thing that's ever happened to me in my whole life other than childbirth. But she was like, I think you should. So I did. I drew it out on a sheet of paper. She had computer paper and markers and things. And that was the first tiny moment for me. So when we talk about these tiny moments, that tiny moment where that man that I met who said, you should write your book about your life. You never know who you might help. And it changed the way I felt about it. Because before I was like, I don't want to just talk about my life and myself. Like, who am I? So he became an anchor. That voice became an anchor in the moments where I didn't want to take another tiny moment, when I didn't want to do another, write out another sentence or speak another paragraph into my book, right? What I have to say isn't important. But his words became very important because they became a lifeline for me in the moments that I was discouraged. And my painting became that for me. So during the process, I used painting as a vehicle to move me forward in my journey without even knowing that that's what I was doing. They were just tiny little moments that I felt were very selfish at the time. Yeah.
That's interesting. And that's so powerful. So you've mentioned your painting and the colors a few times as we've been talking. So let's just move on to that. So Ellen, you didn't begin by writing your story. My understanding is you painted it first.
I did.
Was the color able to express something that the words couldn't? Can you help us understand that a little more?
So in the beginning, when I would get like the vision of the angel, I would try to paint the angel, and I didn't know how to paint. Okay.
Wow,
And
that
so
surprises me. You have such beautiful things on your website.
I did not know how to paint. I didn't know I was an artist. I didn't take art lessons as a child, or I didn't choose art in school for electives. I had one drawing class in the 8th grade, pencil drawing. I mean, I did not know I was an artist. So as I awakened, the gifts came online, and this was a burning desire. Like I was like, I have to figure out how to translate what I'm seeing somehow. And I don't want to write it. So I'm going to try to paint it. And in my quiet time, I would always hear, Source say, Holy Spirit say, just keep painting, Ellie. So I started painting. And for about 3 years, I was trying to paint what I actually saw. And they were not coming out so great. And so one day I put my paintbrush down and I said, okay, all right, we've got to have a conversation here. So I'm talking to God and I say, look,
God, I need to sit you down here.
we need to have a sit down conversation, because I love what you're giving me. I love I love what you are showing me. It's way like so profound. And I really don't feel like I'm doing you justice trying to paint me flying over a wheat field that I feel like a lion. And then I end up just painting the head of a lion that looks like a cartoon character. It's a nope for me. Like, that's not what I want to do. I got an answer immediately. It was brilliant. And the answer was, don't paint what you see, paint what you feel. And I said, well, how do I do that? And I heard, start with the color that you see first, because I was always getting these visions in color, lots of color. Like when I first started painting on the little sheets of paper, my son said, Mom, you're using your watercolor so thick. You should probably move on to acrylics. I was trying to paint, these colors that were so bright. Anyway, so I did, and I bought a 4x5 canvas from Michael's, when just a cheapo canvas. I had a studio at the time in an artist colony with a bunch of other artists. And I was the new kid on the block. They juried me in because they knew I didn't know how to paint and they wanted to mother me. And that's exactly what they said. We're going to mentor you. So Razier and I, she's a friend of mine, we went out to, it was St. Patrick's Day. I'll never forget it. We went out to across the street to have a little snack and a drink on St. Patrick's Day. And then I walked back over to the studio and I said, I'm going to go paint. And I knew I was going to paint the way that I was told to paint a few days before. So I set up my palette with all the yellows of a lion and the wheat field that I saw, like all those colors. And I just put my music on and I painted it. And I looked at it afterwards and I went, well, that was a waste of canvas. And I left just so disappointed. I went home. I came back the next morning because I felt like this nudging, go back, the excitement of like Christmas morning in my belly. And when I got there, Rosier was standing there with a couple other artists and they were in my cubicle. And I was like, what are you guys doing? And I thought maybe I spilled something. Maybe my painting fell over, And they said, oh, we're admiring your painting. I was like, my God, what are you admiring? Right. And they said, well, we didn't know that you could paint people so well. And I said, I don't paint people. And they go, well, you do now. And they moved out of the way. And on this canvas, there was a man hugging a woman. Her head is turned sideways. You could see her profile. And then there was a little boy, about, I'd say 3-4 years old, looking at them. He had striped t-shirt on, shorts. You could see his face, his eyes looking at them. I didn't even know what foreshadowing was. I just was like, I was so blown away. And from that moment forward, I just went back and I said, okay, I had already documented the dreams in the other paintings. I was like, you know what? Every time I get something from Source now, every time I get an inspiration or a download or a message, I'm just going to turn it into color. And so I did that. And I named my first website Angelic Manifestations because I really believed that these were angelic messages I was getting because the first was an angel. And then now I know that they're vibrational frequencies. Now I know that they actually hold a frequency that actually impacts the space around them. And I work with them with individuals through meditation and things like that. But it all started from that first drawing of the angel at that Reiki attunement. And that's what I mean by those tiny little steps. I had to go outside of my comfort zone. I had never drawn anything or did anything. There was a group of people at the table. I was like, that's really, it's just, that's the thread through the whole thing.
That's really magical. So I know that you've worked with the colors for decades. I'm a little focused on this color thing. That was just so magical. Do certain colors seem to invite different emotional or spiritual experiences for you?
Along my journey, I started to study color, and I believe in past lives. I believe I worked with color in Egypt. And what I started to recognize is that color has a direct impact on the way you feel. And I did this YouTube. It's an old YouTube of me. My hair is dark. I'm quite a bit heavy. I mean, it's a long time ago, it was probably like 2013. And I was talking about, if an alien came to meet me, how would I communicate with this alien without language? And I would do it through color. I think color speaks volumes. If I hold up red is a powerful energy. It's a slow moving vibration. It's a powerful energy. It's like, it can be a sign of, forcefulness, right? Whereas white, like we put the white flag up, surrender, serenity, right? So it's already in the collective consciousness, this language of color. And I think it has a strong impact on our subconscious mind. And so learning how to use color intentionally to convey a message became my language. And I was fascinated by it, just like I'm fascinated by numerology. That's fascinating. So every letter has a number attached. I mean, it's just like, this is a whole hidden language that we don't even really talk about I haven't seen that much of it in the spiritual community, but color is very much a language. And that's the way I equated it. If I was on another planet and I was talking to alien beings, like how could I communicate with them without any dialect? And it would definitely be, I would do it through color.
Wow. I really have to wrap my head around that one. That'll be something that I will ponder after the show a little bit. That's pretty powerful because color's a big deal in our world. Has your understanding of creativity changed over the years?
Well, I think I'm always changing. I'm always evolving. I'm always, going caterpillar, butterfly. I mean, there's been lots of stages, right? But I think that what has changed the most for me in this last couple of years is understanding that my desire to paint, yes, it was transformative in that I was getting these inspirational downloads, if you want to call them that, spiritual knowledge, wisdom, whatever. And I was trying to document that because I knew it was important. But what God was doing behind the scenes, or what spirit was doing behind the scenes, was healing my nervous system. That is what I've discovered over the last 2 years, is that the painting literally helped rewire my neural pathways, my nervous system in such a way that I can be here speaking with you today. And that is the magic of it. And that's really why I feel so compelled now to publicly speak about this, because I feel that painting saved my life. It allowed me to get to know myself. There's no mistakes in art. So if I would be painting, I knew that I could manipulate it. I could, if a blob of paint fell down in the beginning, if I messed up the canvas, I would do the pointillism with the women, and I would just cover it with a woman. I look back on that and it was like I became more flexible. I became more tolerant. I became more loving to myself. My internal critic, the inner critic, became my fan now. No longer was a critic, but a cheerleader. There were just so many things about my brain that changed. And so that's what I've recognized in the last couple of years, is that me having the determination and the curiosity, which was a lot of it, and the downright curiosity of why all of a sudden I want to paint, and then staying with it even in the hard times, even in the times when it wasn't convenient, or I felt like, this is a waste of time, like continuing with that. It was the greatest gift that I could have received from myself, for myself, to do that.
Interesting. That is really fascinating. And I'm not really sure how I want to ask this. Do you believe creativity is something that we make, or is it something that we are actually remembering?
I think it is something that we are remembering. And I think that it is connected to the collective consciousness, to the one mind, to the greater mind. And I believe that during this phase of awakening, going back to the beginning of our conversation, so many people are waking up. One of the very first symptoms of waking up is being called to some sort of creative expression. I've noticed that across the board, whether it's, writing, drawing, cooking, gardening, knitting. People tend to, when they start to go through this awakening, this collective awakening, new giftings or old giftings that are being remembered are chiming in, and they're feeling that pull to do that. And I think that that's a big part of this collective awakening. Going into the age of the artist, what I was taught by my first guru is that the age of Aquarius is the age of the artist. And so the byproduct of this human awakening, we're all coming into one giant butterfly, in my opinion, that's what I've been shown, is going to be all these magical gifts that we all have that have laid dormant, that are going to come up and be seen. We're going to have so much free time on our hands because the technology is going to be so advanced. We're not going to be working like we used to. And so these gifts coming online are going to be for all to see, and we're going to have lots of time to do it. And so I do believe that they are part of our innate nature, and our chakra grid opens and we're operating from all 144,000 nadis, then we are going to illuminate, and we're going to illuminate through our gifts. And we're going to share those gifts openly with one another. And it's just going to be a beautiful, beautiful coexistence together. That's what I believe.
Well, that's really exciting. I have heard a lot of people talk about things are going to free up for us as AI and different technology sort of picks up the mundane, and more resources will be available for us to really just live and experience life in a different way. So that would make sense that our other areas would turn on and we'd be able to experience them because we're no longer coming from that survival mode type of thing.
Yeah. And that's another thing, like coming into, out of that survival mode is really part of that whole caterpillar process. That whole going from
Yeah.
butterfly, stepping out of that fear and trusting the process. So that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And it feels like, there's a lot of energy out there that is really challenging us with the fear. It feels like there is an area out there that keeps upping the bar with the fear, which I feel in the end is going to be enough for people to say, no more, we're done with this.
That's why I believe the creative process is so important, because know thyself, know thy neighbor. And I was given that download, almost 2 decades ago. Know thyself, know thy neighbor. When we are connected to our own gifting and we're operating from that place of self-discovery and allowing, the collective one mind influence us in a way to bring forward some creative project. And it really does help to mitigate that fear. And when we look at the world and we look at war and we look at, competition versus cooperation, it's all fear-based. If I'm afraid of who I am, I'm going to be afraid of who you are. And so the creative process can be a place of self-discovery, to love yourself, to go from that inner critic to that inner cheerleader. Because when we can be our own cheerleader in a loving place, and we're no longer afraid of who we are, we're not going to be afraid of our neighbor. And that builds a bridge to more tolerance and flexibility. I remember early on painting with these bright colors. I did lots of art walks, and back then, it wasn't popular what I was speaking about and painting. And I had this one gentleman who was very angry about one of my paintings. And I said, what is it about it that rubs you? And he said, it's just too bright. Those
Goodness.
things made me curious. Like how, I mean,
Yeah. Why
yeah,
such a response? Yeah.
exactly. That's what made me curious
Yeah.
about finding out what it is inside of us as people that makes us have an aversion to a color. That's it. In a nutshell. I mean, I was hook, line, and sinker with that. I was like, I've got to follow this rabbit. And I mean, he was downright in my face over it. It's like,
Wow.
look,
Well, it
buddy.
sounds like you followed the rabbit very well. That's pretty fascinating.
Mhm.
So is this a chicken egg statement? If I ask the question, do you believe healing makes us more creative, or does creativity help us heal?
It's both. They're
Yeah,
it's like,
it's
I see it as the infinity sign. They're
right.
total cycle of the caterpillar and butterfly. The butterfly lays eggs and then she dies. And then the caterpillar goes, I mean, it's just this complete cycle of this transformation that just keeps repeating itself. It's so beautiful.
So I have a question for you. If your life today were a painting,
Oh
what
my.
colors would it contain that weren't there 20 years ago?
Wow. That's a very creative question, Sandra. I have to think about it. So what colors would be there now that weren't there before, right? That's
Correct.
the question. Okay. So interesting. I would say that in the beginning, I didn't paint with metallics like golds and silvers and opalescence and that kind of thing. And as my work progressed, I started to include more of that in my work. And it's very subliminal. So I put it on the canvas before I lay on the brighter colors. And it's there completely as an energetic gateway. And I would say that would probably be a good depiction of where I've gone in my life. It's our subtle presence that has the biggest impact. And that's why it's so important that we are in harmony with ourselves.
Wow, that's really interesting to me, and that those colors were missing and they're there now. They do feel appropriate for the journey that you've been in. They feel like how you've alchemized yourself.
It is. It's like alchemy for sure. And I appreciate you asking me that question. I never thought about that. I'm so touched by that question.
You're welcome. This is like your world. So I was just sort of fascinated about where you were going to go with that.
Yeah, and those opals came out when I was in Italy painting in 16. So all of that came out in Italy in year 16. So I would have already have been painting for about 12 years by then.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the biggest misconception people have about transformation from your perspective?
Oh my gosh. The misconception, transformation. I guess that's a hard question. There's a lot of misconception collectively. When I started going through transformation, everybody thought I was going crazy. So there's that misconception. When you start coloring outside the lines, when you say, you know what, I'm going to do it this way, not everybody's a big fan of that, right? So
Right.
that's one misconception, I think, that you're not going to be integrated back into society. I think that is a misconception, that you're going to be flying solo for a long time and you're never going to feel normal again. I'm here to say, if normal is a word, you know what I'm saying, integrated back in.
Absolutely.
Because there's a
Absolutely.
phase where you're very much excluded.
But that's
And
part of the work.
it is part of the work, and you need to be.
Correct.
That isolation is super important to do the inner work. So I guess that would be, for me, a misconception was, I was like, God, am I ever going to be part of a group again? Am I always going to be like the one on the outside? Because I was transforming in such a way that I didn't fit anywhere. I didn't belong anywhere. I couldn't fit in anywhere because there was so much change happening. But anyways, I would say that might be one thing that I would say. And I'm here to tell everybody, the good news is it will integrate all in, and then you will be rewoven into the tapestry of life. And I wrote this poem when I was in my 20s called Tapestry, about gold, silver, bronze, and red. And I'm thinking about it right now. You will be woven back into that tapestry beautifully. So not to fret.
Well, that is perfect. Ellen, for the listeners who would like to learn more about your work and how they would go about it and what it would look like, how can they do that?
I have a website. It's my name, ellenbenfatti.com. So you can look me up on there. You can also look me up on Amazon to get the book. Everything's all on my website. So you can look at the art and you can see the services I provide in my book. I've tried to make it as detailed. You can hear some other podcasts I've done. So it's a one-stop, opportunity to learn as much about me as you want.
Thank you. And you do have some beautiful artwork on that website, so I enjoyed that. I have one last question for you as we're winding down. What's the most important thing we did not talk about today?
The most important thing we did not talk about today: you're not alone.
Wow, that's a biggie.
You might feel isolation. You might feel alone. I have goosebumps right now, so this is important. You're not alone. You have an entire team around you as you go through this whole caterpillar experience to butterfly. You have ancestors lined up behind you. You have angelic beings. You have your guardian angel. You have Source, God, the creator of all that is, that all will ever be. You are so supported through this process, and you are absolutely not alone.
Well, that is a perfect way to end the show. Ellen, thank you for sharing your story so openly and for reminding us that transformation isn't always graceful or immediate. Sometimes it asks us to sit with uncertainty, honestly, to trust the process, which can be really difficult, and discover parts of ourselves that honestly we never knew existed. I appreciate you joining us today and sharing your journey with our listeners. To learn about Happy Hour and the latest at Wild Soul Gatherings, you can go to our website, wildsoulgathering.com. And to everyone listening, thank you for being here. Until next time, thanks again, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I really enjoyed my time with you today.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on YouTube. And if you'd like to explore these topics more deeply, visit wildsoulsgathering.com, where you'll find free resources and guided practices designed to support your own journey of curiosity, healing, and personal growth. This is Dr. Sandra Marie, sending each of you peace and love.